All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem, Avli, Tilson, and Wall families. From Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month, sending their love from Eretz Yisrael and inviting us in Eretz Hashem to come and join them. Our week of learning sponsors, Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Benjamin Adler, Achavar Baruch Mordechai Ben Moreno Rab Nassan Zichron Livracha, and we dedicate our learning Le'ilui Nishmos, our precious fallen soldiers, Major Shlomo Yonatan Chazut and David Moshe Ben Shitrit. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, their precious neshamos will have an aliyah. All of our soldiers should be successful. B'chol ma'asei yadayim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should return our hostages b'shalom and b'karov. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a short but exciting daf today. A lot of very interesting cases ahead of us. Today's daf is Samech Beis 62. We are picking up on Samech Aleph Beis 61b, 8 lines up from the bottom. Silimar says as follows: Sahu d'Amalei l'Chavrei. Ara de Bechia mizabnina lacha. So we'll say here's the case. There was a guy who said to his friend. So Reuven said to Shimon, I'm selling you the land of the Bechia. That's the name. That was the name of the parcel of land. So Reuven said, I'm selling you the Bechia. So what's the problem? Havi le tarti ar asa da havi miskarin Rabbi de Bechia. The problem is Reuven had 2 parcels that went by this name. So 2 parcels that were named the Bechia parcels. So I'll say, so ultimately again, so now here's what's interesting. So we're going to see these really 2 things happening over here. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Ara de Bechia, Shekana mi Rabbi Chia, Ara Lashon Yachid, Amrle Vita Lokeach HaBechus. So okay, so before we get to this, so the Gemara says, what's the case? What's the case? So Reuven contracted to Shimon to sell him property, the Bechia. So it turns out that Reuven has 2 parcels called the Bechia. Now, Shimon claims that Reuven sold both of them to him. Reuven claims, I only sold one of them to you. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Ravashi, Chado Amrle Tarti Lo. So Rashi says, okay, this is a pretty simple case. Reuven, in other words, the lashon of when I say the Bechia, Reuven was only selling 1 parcel. Just inherent in the wording of the sale was 1 parcel, not 2 parcels. The Amrle Arasa Stama Miut Arasa Shtayim. Now, if he would have said, I was selling you lands, then by definition, the minimum of lands is 2 parcels. So again, when saying the Bechia, that means 1 parcel of land. If Reuven were to sell Shimon lands, the minimum plural of lands is at least 2 parcels. Okay? So the Gemara goes weiter. So before we go on to that, Rashbam also points out over here, there's obviously one other issue in this Bechia case, right? So what we've established is that Reuven only sold Shimon 1 parcel. The other issue that comes up is, which parcel? So with that, Rashbam says Reuven is the one who is believed to define or to determine which parcel. Obviously, if Shimon claims it's the other one, then it becomes a classic case of Hamotzi Mechavir Lavaraya. Okay, fine. So now the Gemara goes on in this same topic of using, or I should say, defining words used in transactions. So the Gemara goes go right. Amalei Kol Ar Asa de Islay Labar Min Bustani Upardisi. What happens if Reuven sells Shimon all of my land, right? Reuven says, Shimon, I hereby sell you all of my land. What does all of my land include? It includes all of his lands except for Bustani and Pardisi. Rashi says Bustani are gardens, and Pardisi are vineyards. So land, interestingly enough, land means land, but it does not include gardens and orchard and vineyards. Or orchards. The Gemara says, "Babe is good." I'm sorry. Vi Amarle Zihira, but if you use lashon of Zihira, so I'll say so. Zihira, Rashi points out over here, Zihira kol karkaos kriyin kain. So Zihira is almost a more generic term. So what's interesting is as follows: Ara, although we translate it as land, and for us that seems to be a pretty inclusive statement. From the Gemara's perspective, Ara refers to a particular type of land. Meaning, in other words, it's all land aside from gardens and vineyards. On the other hand, the lashon of Zihira is a much more inclusive statement that includes all lands. All lands. Zihira, afilu beibustani, upardisi. What doesn't Zihira include? Lebar, mibati va'avdi. So Zihira doesn't include homes and slaves, homes and servants. Now again, remember again, what do servants have to do with anything over here? Because remember, avadim are hukshul karkos. An eved is like karka. So you might have thought that again in an all-expansive Zihira sale, maybe even an eved is included. Kamash malon that he's not. Top of samech beis. V'i amrle nechasi afilu bati va'avdi. Now we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So therefore, kind of in the progression of all of this, but if Reuven were to say to Shimon, I'm selling you nechasi, I'm selling you all of my property. So what does property include? What does property include? So apparently property is the most expansive halachic statement that includes everything. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Only one issue. What doesn't nechasi include? Rashi says over here, "Avi amarle nechasi afilu bati va'avdi aval metaltali lo." So it doesn't include metaltalin. So we'll say, so kind of if you go ahead and if you go through the progression of the Gemara, so if you sell someone a parcel of land, singular, you're selling one land. You sell someone parcels of land, that's a minimum of 2. You sell someone land, or all of your land, all of your ara. Ara includes all of your land except for gardens and vineyards. You sell someone zihira. Zihira means everything, including gardens and vineyards, but doesn't include homes and servants. If you sell someone nechasai, all of my property, that includes everything, even servants and homes, but doesn't include metaltalin. If you say kol nechasai means everything. Everything. Now I'll say, why is this important? This is very important because, again, remember, this is transactional lingo, right? You have to know what words to use in order to be able to affect the kind of transaction that you want, which is true in general in life. You have to know which words to use and how to use them in order to be able to affect the outcomes that you are looking for. All right, incredible. So we'll say, so along these same lines of kind of what words you need to use in order to affect transactions, we're going to now transition to a series of cases. And again, let's say I want to thank Dr. Gavant. I remember that Dr. Gavant had the Sefer Perish Chai. I thought I had it on Basra, but I don't, which is the picture. So I put it on the chat. The pictures. So again, we're just going to reference actually a couple of pictures are actually you can see in the Gemara, depending on how old or new your Gemara is, depends on the number of pictures you may have on the page. So there's a number of pictures on the page also, but we'll just visual aids maybe a little bit easier today. So just tell you what we're going to do over the next couple of cases. So now we've been speaking about what type of words create the expansiveness of the transaction. Now we're going to discuss the following case. Reuven is selling Shimon. Although truth is we probably can't use Reuven and Shimon because they're used as borders over here. We'll call it A is selling to B. A is selling to B a piece of property. Now what A does is A is identifying the piece of property by association of the other fields that border it. So we're going to see a number of different cases where A uses different markers or different signs in order to identify which property he's selling to B and what the ramifications of those particular simanim that he's using. So let's analyze. Says the Gemara. Dab of Sameh Beis 62a, first line. So the Gemara says, Meitzer lo, Meitzer echad aruch, u'Meitzer achad katzer. So I'll say, so look at the following case. If you take a look, it's on the just using the PDF that I sent you. If you look at image A, I find this one a little bit easier to relate to than the one that Rashi has. So if you look over here, so A is selling to B a field. Now the field, if you notice over here, what ends up happening is as follows. The field on one side is bordered by Yehuda, and on the other side is bordered by Shimon and Reuven. This is one that's marked A. So what's interesting over here, so this is the field that A is selling to B. But what A does is he says, I'm selling you the field that is sandwiched in between the fields of Yehuda and Shimon. He doesn't make any reference to Reuven. So we'll say, so the shaila is now, so remember again, if we were framing this in the right way, and A was selling the field to B, how would A phrase it? How would he phrase it? I'm selling you the field that is sandwiched between the fields of Yehuda and Shimon and Ruvain. You don't really have to go ahead and mention Levi and Yisachar in this because it's obvious, right? Once you're going ahead and kind of mentioning the east-west borders, the north-south ones kind of become a little bit obvious, right? So I'm saying, but instead, what A does is he only mentions Shimon. So I'm selling you the field in between the fields of Yehuda and Shimon. He omits Ruvain from the language of the sale. So the shaila is, what does this do? What are the ramifications of the failure to mention Ruvain? So we'll say interesting machlokes. Rav says, Amar Rav, lo kana ela kineged hakazar. So Rav says, okay, I can say exactly what's happening over here. So A is not selling B the entire field. Rather, what is he doing? He's selling him essentially half the field. He's selling him the part of the field that is in between Yehuda and Shimon. But that's it. So you can see in image A, you can see over here, that's the shaded area. That's all he's selling him over here. Just, Chavra on Zoom. I don't know if everyone here. I hope that you, if you're on the WhatsApp group, I sent it out on the WhatsApp. Okay, good. If you're not on the WhatsApp group, maybe post in Zoom and we'll add you to the WhatsApp group, or somebody maybe will post the link in the WhatsApp group. Thank you. All right. So the Gemara says as follows. No, it doesn't make sense to post the WhatsApp link in the WhatsApp group. Okay, good. All right, sorry, it's Monday. Okay, so Rav says that halacha l'maisa, clearly the fact that A only mentioned Shimon and didn't mention Ruvain is that A is only selling to B half of the field, essentially the area between Yehuda and Shimon. So really borders half of Yehuda's field and Shimon's field. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Kana Ravasi Rav v'yikne kineged rosh tor, but maybe not. Maybe what's really happening over here. But say if you take a look, you can look. It's actually I forgot to label it, but it's the picture right below. It's the picture right below. Picture A is the one that's labeled 519. 519. So maybe halacha l'maisa over here. What's occurring is that A is selling to B the field as demarcated by the diagonal, right? So that's what's happening in image 519, right? So maybe so in other words, Rav simply draws the line between Shimon and Yehuda. But maybe not. Maybe he's creating a diagonal, and ultimately, again, this really requires, this would be a good PowerPoint share. All right, so fine. So maybe he's selling him just the diagonal, right? And ultimately, again, so you can see over here in image 519, essentially what you do is you draw from the corner of Shimon's field all the way to the corner of Yehuda's field. Because remember, again, when A is selling to B, he is mentioning Yehuda's field as the western border of the field. He's mentioning Shimon's field as the eastern border of the field, and failing to mention Ruvain. So as Rav draws the line straight down from the edge of Shimon's field to half of Yehuda's field, so comes along Rav Kana Ravasi, say, draw the diagonal. Just the diagonal from the corner of Shimon's field all the way to the long side of Yehuda's field. And therefore, again, maybe A is selling B, that entire area over here.
How do you go to what is your entrance to the field?
Whatever, they can figure out the entrance. That we'll talk about entrances a different time. That entrances we'll get to. That's a whole different sugya, Mir Hashem. We'll get to that. So let's go right there. So the Gemara says, Shasek Rav. So Rav was quiet. So the Gemara says, so the assumption over here when the Gemara says Shasek Rav is that Rav accepted the opinion of Rav Kahana and Ravasi. Now we're going to see that's not totally true in just a moment. Umode Rav, but Rav agrees, Heicha di'ika meitza Ruvain v'Shimon mechad gisa, umeitza Levi v'Yehuda mechad gisa. So listen to this. But Rav accepts in the following case, I will say. What happens if you go to the image that's labeled B? That's labeled B. So Rav would agree in the following scenario, and I will say now you'll see an interesting distinction between A and B. In A, what we had is on the eastern side you had Shimon and Ruvain. On the western side you just had Yehuda. In image B over here, this new case over here, on the eastern side you have Ruvain and Shimon, and on the western side you have Levi and Yehuda. So now you have two neighbors on each side. So Umode Rav would agree, Kalhecha Deika Meitzar Ruvain V'Shimon Mechad Gisa. That if you have Ruvain and Shimon on one side, on the eastern side, right, Umeitzar Levi Yehuda Mechad Gisa, and Levi and Yehuda on the western side, Midahavele Lemichtav Le Ruvain Keneged Levi, V'Shimon Keneged Yehuda, V'Lo Kasavle. So we'll say, so since ultimately, again, in this case, Rav would say like this, Rav would agree, if A really only wanted to convey to B half of the field, right? If he only wants to convey half of the field, there's a very easy way to do it, right? How do you do it? I'm selling you the field between Reuben and Levi, or I'm selling you the field between Shimon and Yehuda. That's if he only wanted to sell half of the field, that's how he should have done it. But the fact that he did not do it, so the fact that he did not do it, Shema Mina Keneged Rosh Tor Huda Amarle. Since he did not do that, then it's clear that he's selling him the field in accordance with the diagonal. So ultimately, again, if he just says, I'm selling you the field between Reuven, Shimon, and Yehuda, that in that case he means to make the diagonal. So both sides. So therefore, again, what we have in this first case is something very interesting. So now, two cases. A is selling to be a field, and that field itself is sandwiched on all sides between different fields. So again, what happens if halacha l'maisa? So again, in case number one, A is selling to be a field in between the fields of Yehuda and Shimon. Yehuda extending on the western side, Shimon only extending for half of the eastern side. So what happens over here? So Rav says, sell them half of the field. Rav Kan Ravasi sold them the diagonal. But even Rav would agree in a case like we saw in image B, where it's Reuven and Shimon on the east, Levi and Yehuda on the west, where if A really wanted to sell B half a field, there's an easy way to do that. Just mention two of the neighbors. The fact that he fails to do that, and he only mentions the field sandwiched in between Reuven and Shimon and Yehuda, indicates that even in that case, Rav will agree to the diagonal split. Okay, incredible. Again, as Rav Daniel mentioned, access, we're going to get to. Access is going to be its own separate set of halachas, as we'll discuss. Next, Meitzar Reuven Mizrach Umarav, Umeitzar Shimon Safan V'Daram. So we'll say, so now take a look at, did I not mark this? Okay, fine. So let's see this. So I see here's the next case. Meitzar Reuven, Mizrach Umarav, or Meitzar Shimon Safan V'Daram. So we'll say, so now let's say again, A is selling B a field, and Reuven borders that field on the east and the west, and Shimon borders that field on the north and the south. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, so remember again, in all of these cases, we're talking about how should the sale be worded in order for A to convey to B the proper field that is being sold. So Tzarech L'michtav Le, Meitzar Ruvain Ruchen Trin, or Meitzar Shimon Ruchen Trin. So A has to say to B, I'm selling you the field that is bordered by Ruvain on two directions, and bordered by Shimon on two directions. The idea that the Gemara is highlighting over here is that halacha l'maisa, it's not just enough to say the field that is bordered by Reuven and Shimon, but rather again it must be articulated in a document of sale, the field that is bordered by Reuven in two directions, field that is bordered by Shimon in two directions. Okay, let's go back to Ibailuhu. So I'll say this is now a very interesting case here. Ibailuhu, siem lo esakranas mahu, Kimin gem or kimin gem mahu. Okay, so we'll say now watch this. Take a look. This is pictures C and D. So let me show you what's happening over here. So if you take a look at C, and the truth is these are also in the Rashbam, but essentially if you take a look at C, in this case over here, if you notice, you have a whole bunch of squares. Each of those squares represent individual fields that are owned by people. So in this case over here, A says to B, I'm selling you the field that is bordered by Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Now if you notice, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, they own the corner fields. So now A owns that field that's in the middle of all the little squares. He owns the big square in the middle of all the little squares. So in an ideal world, how would he have demarcated the field that A is selling to B? What would he have said? He would have mentioned all of the owners of the small squares. But instead what he does is he just mentions the corners. The corners. Similarly, if you take a look at image D, which you can also see, by the way, is the bottom image, the second to last image on the right side, on the right side of the Rashbam, second one from the top on the left of the Rashbam. I know those directions made absolutely no sense, right? But that's why I just put it over here. You can see it on the sheet because it happens to be the Rashbam's one is a little bit clearer than the image, but you can see D. If you notice over here, so Reuven and Shimon both have fields that border that middle field, but their fields, if you notice over here, border at a right angle. So there are two right angles on each side of the field. And I both say, so what's happening in both of these cases, the common denominator in both of these cases is A is selling property to B. So, but instead of A, so just to be clear, what is the Gemara trying to highlight? I will say, what's the takeaway message of this Gemara? In general, what's the takeaway message of this Gemara? Say what you mean. Which, by the way, is a tremendous Musar Haskell in this sugi in general. A lot of times in life, we say things, and we leave it to people to intuit what it is that we really mean, and then we get upset when they don't catch on to what it is that we're saying. Right? This is a tremendous dynamic in Shalom Bayis, where it happens all of the time, where spouses, right, will say something, and I expect my spouse to understand what it is that I'm saying and what it is that I mean, even though I'm not speaking in full sentences, and I'm not going ahead and articulating complete thoughts. But if you love me, you should be able to read my mind. The age of Nevuah ended with the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, right? There have been no Nevi'im for thousands of years. No one could read your mind. So if you want your wife, you want your husband to know what it is that you're saying, say it. Say it. And same idea even in friendships, in relationships. If you want someone to understand what it is that you mean, then be explicit. And if you're not explicit, don't expect them to catch on to the nuances of what it is that you're conveying or to some type of subliminal message that you are trying to get across. That is the Musar Haskell in this. When you're selling property, be explicit. The property is bordered by people, articulate every single border. Because when you don't, we're not sure what you mean. So for example, take a look at image C. In this case over here, so A is selling property to B. Now what is A selling? He's selling something in the big square in the middle. The problem is, he only identifies the field that is being sold by the corners, by Reuven, Shimon, Levi, who are the corner guys, right? Not all of the borders. So I will say, so here's the Shaila. What does it mean? So there are two ways we could interpret it. Possibility one is, he's selling him the whole field. He's selling him the whole middle field. He's just identifying the four corners, or maybe not. Maybe he's just selling him two swaths of land in between the corners. That's, by the way, that's if you see in paragraph in C, so you can see the X. The X represents maybe all A is selling B are those two strips of land in between the corner fields. Similarly, if you take a look at image D, right, picture D. So when A says to B, I'm selling you the field, right, sandwiched in between the corners of Reuven's field and Shimon's field. So what is A saying to B? Is he saying, I'm selling you the whole field as situated between Reuven and Shimon? Or maybe he's just selling him the strip of land that extends in between Reuven's field and Shimon's field. That's the two dotted lines that you see over there in image D. So the problem is, because, again, A is not fully articulating the entirety of the borders around the parcel being sold, it just leaves some level of ambiguity. So so if A identified to be the corners of the field being sold, that's picture C, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, the corners, or Kimin Gem, Mau, or that's image D. What's the halacha? We'll say Amud Beis. The Serigin Mahu. Or what about the case of the Serigin? I will say that's image E. So I'll say, so this is also a very interesting case. So first of all, before you even look at the image, take a look at the Rashbam. The Serigin Mau, Kigon Shayu Makifin also Shmona B'nei Adam, Shnaim L'chol Ruach. So I'll say this case is even a little bit more interesting, which is, now you can look at the image for just a moment. Imagine for a moment A is selling to B a parcel of land, but that parcel of land essentially is bordered by 8 different people. 2 in each direction. So you can see in the image, you've got Reuven, Shimon, right, in the east, and then so on and so forth. Back to the Rashbam. Shmona b'nei Adar, Shnaim l'chol ruach, Ruvain the Shimon min HaMizrach, Levi v'Yehuda min HaTzafon, Yisachar Zvulun min HaMarav, Yosef v'Binyamin min HaDaram. So beautiful to see the Shvatim together. V'kasav Ruvain Meitzar Mizrach, Levi Meitzar Tzafon. So we'll say, here's what's interesting in this case. In this case, so watch what's happening. So, right, A is selling to be a field, right? The field, or he's selling him property. I shouldn't even say this. He's selling him property. Now, he's selling him property in between. That's the square in the middle of all of these people who borders. So there are eight neighbors. The problem just is, what A did is, he said, I'm selling you the field. The neighbors, by the way, are Ruvain in the east, right? Levi in the south, Zvulun in the west, and Binyamin or Yosef in the north. So what he does is he's only articulating one of the neighbors in each of the directions and fails to mention the other. So I'll say, so remember, like in all of these cases, how do I understand that? Could very well be that what he's just doing is he's speaking shorthand. I don't know if he speaks shorthand, but you understand, speaking in an abbreviated form. In other words, I have to go through all the neighbors and all the borders. Understand, once I articulate one of them, you get it. It's clear. Or maybe not. Maybe he's only selling him the shaded areas by each, the diagonal half of, in other words, only the land that literally, again, borders the particular neighbor that he mentioned. So I'll say, so because we don't know ultimately, again, what it is that he's saying, the Gemara says, Teku. We're just simply not sure exactly what it is that he's trying to convey. Incredible. So we'll say, so Meitzer lo, Meitzer Rishon, Meitzer Shini, Meitzer Shlishi, Meitzer Revi, lo, Meitzer lo. So I'll say, so now this is a very interesting case. So now this one, the truth is, you could see it's actually right below image image E on the same page. It's pretty much 536, 537. Again, we'll discuss variations of this case, but here's something interesting. A sells B a piece of property. So we'll say, if you could imagine over here, what he does is as follows. He identifies the borders on 3 of the sides and fails to do so on the 4th side. Right? So he says, this is the field bordered by Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. And let's say, for argument's sake, that is north, south, and east. Right? Or actually, let's do it east, west, and south. He fails to go ahead and identify the northern border. The northern border. So what do I do with that? In other words, how do we understand that? So we'll say, so the Gemara says, Amarav, Kana hakol, chutz mimeitzer Ravi. So Rav says, look, so obviously again, the fact that A failed to articulate the northern border, right, the 4th side, the northern border, indicates to us that B will acquire everything with the exception of the northern side. Now what does that mean practically? If you look at the Rashbam is right below the image. So B will acquire everything that is absorbed within the 3 corners, three articulated borders. Chutz mi meitzar daled hatelem atzmo shel meitzar revi'i lo kana de lahachi ahanile de lo kasev meitzar revi'i. So let's listen to this. Rav says, here's what's happening. The fact that A articulated, right, the east, west, and southern borders, but did not go ahead. But did not go ahead and articulate the northern border. So Rav says indicates that A is holding something back. What is he holding back? So he's holding back again. We'll call it a strip. Thank you. A strip. I was going to say a swath, right? A strip of land. A strip of land across the northern border. Now, how large that strip is, we'll discuss. So again, so pretty much A, right, is selling to be the entire area, but the fact that he doesn't articulate the northern border tells us that halach halamaisa, he is withholding a strip of land for himself. For himself. Shmuel says, no. Afilu meitzar revi. Shmuel says, not true. Halach halamaisa again. Do you know why A didn't write the 4th border? Right? Do you know why he didn't write the 4th border? Do you know why? He didn't need to. He understood that once you go ahead and you articulate east, west, and south, it's understood. In other words, the field is closed in on all 4 sides. Again, we're going to come back to Daniel's issue. How exactly do you access a field that is enclosed by 4 other fields? We'll discuss that. But essentially, Shmuel says the seller, A, did not have to say anything because halacha l'mais, again, it's clear what the borders are. Ravasi says, listen to this, Afilu lo kana ela telem echad al pnei kula. Wow. So I will say, Ravasi has the most extreme position. Now, Ravasi is picture 538. I'm sorry, I forgot to mark these off. Picture 538 on your sheet. Ravasi says, in fact, failure to identify the northern border says that all A is selling to B is a strip of land along all three borders. That's the shaded area in 538. Lo kana ela talam echad al pnei kula. Now, by the way, what does that mean? And Rashbam says over here, talam echad al pnei kula. Eitel gimel mitzarim. All A is selling to B is a strip of land along three borders. Kamin ches, like the letter ches. That's picture 538. Picture 538. Now listen, so first of all, I understand Rav, I understand Shmuel, right? I understand Rav, because Rav is saying failure to articulate the northern border means that A is holding back something for himself. He's holding back a strip of land on the northern border for himself, right? Shmuel will say, no, he's not holding back anything. There's just not a need to articulate the northern border once you've done east, west, and south. Ravasi is, how do you understand Ravasi? Ravasi says failure to articulate the northern border essentially means that what? All A is selling B is a strip of land along all three of the articulated borders. So what's that? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you. Sarvala the Amar Shir Shir. So Ravasi on the one hand holds like Rav, right? Because Rav says the failure to articulate the northern border means that A is holding something back for himself. And once we know that he's withholding something on the northern side, we take that to mean what? He's withholding something on all sides. In other words, once it is clear that he's holding something back on the northern side, we assume that he's holding something back on all the other sides, which means that all he's selling is a strip of land on all of the articulated borders. So we'll say three-way machlokes how to understand this case. Amar Rava says, Hilchasa, kana kula. Sorry, kana hakol, chutz yemetzer revi. So Rava says, the halacha is essentially like Rav, that really in this kind of case, where again A is sold to be the parcel of land, identified east, west, south, failed to identify north, so the entire field encompassed by the articulated borders is sold, with the exception of a strip of land on the northern border. So the Gemara chutz yimeitzer revi v'lo amran ela de lo muvla ava muvla kana. Okay, so we'll say furthermore, this is only said where the fourth side is not absorbed into the other three sides. But if the fourth side is absorbed, then halacha l'maisa, he acquires everything. Now for this, take a look at the Rashbam. You see the pictures of the Rashbam? You see two fields there, muvla and lo muvla. So Rava makes an interesting distinction over here. So Rava say, on the northern border side, the shaila is as follows. Is the northern border absorbed, right? Is that strip of land absorbed within the other three aforementioned borders or not? So when we say that you don't acquire a strip of land on the northern border, that's ultimately, again, where that strip is outside of the other three articulated borders. But if halacha l'maisa, the strip of land on the northern side is absorbed within the three other borders, you will go ahead and acquire that strip as well. So interestingly enough, so we're paskening like Rav, that halacha l'maisa, failure to articulate the northern border means that the seller is holding a strip back for himself, but that's only when that strip is outside of the boundaries of the other three articulated aforementioned borders. But if the strip is absorbed within the other three borders, then B acquires that as well. Incredible. The chilo mivlanamis, listen to this, and even when the fourth side, the strip, that what we'll call the northern strip, is not included within the boundaries of the other three aforementioned borders, namilo amr ela diika le richba de digla vavi tishas kabin. Let's say that strip itself has to be significant. How is significant defined? It has a row of palm trees, and you're capable of planting 9 kav of seed over there. Okay, so this was the, because we're assuming over here that if A is selling land to B, and now we're saying failure to identify the northern border means that A is holding on to a strip of land for himself. It only makes sense if he's holding on to something if what? if it's significant. What's the definition of significant? Something that has a row of palm trees or is large enough to plant 9 kav of seed. But if it's not large enough for this, then bepashtos, we assume that A is not holding it back for himself. But if halacha l'maisa, the strip of land is so small that it doesn't have a row of palm trees, or you can't plant 9 kav of seed in it, then halacha l'maisa, we assume that B acquires this as well. So we're beginning to see something very interesting. So as much as we paskin like Rav, so just let's do the halacha l'maisa. So the halacha l'maisa is A sells to B a parcel of land, right? He identifies, so he's learning the sugyas, he's identified the southern border, the eastern border, the western border, it doesn't identify the northern border. So the way we're pasking halacha l'maisa is like Rav, which means failure to identify the northern border means that A is retaining a strip of land on the northern side for himself. That's what it means. Now what we're doing is we're giving the qualifications for that. So first of all, that's only if that strip extends above the east-west, well, it's going to be the east-west sides, right? But if the strip is included in the east-west borders, then ultimately, again, B acquires that. Furthermore, in order for the strip to be excluded, it has to be significant. What's the definition of significant? Either a row of palm trees or large enough to plant 9 kav of seed. But if it's not that large, then by definition, it will be included in the sale. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Now what we can infer from this is that if the strip is included in the east-west borders, so I'll say in that case, and this will make sense, based on what we said before, if the northern strip is absorbed within the east-west borders, then even if it does have a row of palm trees, or it is large enough for 9 kav of seed, it will still be included in the sale. We'll say an alternate version of what we just mentioned. Amar Rava, Hilchasa, so we'll say this is just an alternate version of Rava. Rava says Hilchasa, Kana Hakol. So we'll say, so in this version, Rava is not paskening like Rav, but rather Rava is paskening like Shmuel. That namely, when A doesn't identify the northern border, why isn't he identify the northern border? Why not? He doesn't have to. He already gave east, west, south. It's understood. We don't need to. It's clear. It's the field that's sandwiched in between these two sides, which the definition means the north side as well. So in this version, Rav is passing like Shmuel. Furthermore, v'lo amran ela demuvla. But when do we say that? That's only if, literally again, the strip of land on the northern side is absorbed within the east-west borders. In other words, this is where literally the northern field, mamish abuts, the east-west fields as well. Avalo mivla lo kani. But if that strip is not absorbed, then halacha l'maisa, A would not acquire it. V'chi mivla nami lo amran. Furthermore, again, even when that strip is absorbed in the east-west borders, the only time we say that A acquires it is ela deleka ale richba de dikba dikla v'lo havi tishas kabin. Furthermore, again, even when it is absorbed, the only time A will acquire it is if there's not a row of palm trees on it, or it's not large enough for 9 kav of seeds. Aval ika le richba de dikla. But if there is a row of palm trees by it, or v'havitishas kabin, or there's enough for 9 kavs of seed, lo kana, ultimately again, then A would not acquire it even if it is absorbed within the east-west borders. Michlal, what can we infer from this? Michlal, dechi lo muvla. I can infer from this that when it is not absorbed, right, if the strip is not absorbed within the east-west borders, then afagav deleka le richba dedekva v'lo havitishas kabin lo kani, that halacha l'maisa, if it's not absorbed, right, even if it doesn't have the requisite size of having a row of palm trees, and ultimately, again, or large enough for 9 kav, B will not acquire it. Fine. So we'll say, so essentially what we have over here is a little problematic because we have two distinct versions of Rava. In version 1, Rava is paskening like Rav, namely that halacha l'maisa, when you omit the northern border, that means that A is withholding a strip, right, a strip of land on the northern side for himself. Now, when that applies again is a machlokes, but according to the second version, Rava is paskening like Shmuel, namely again failure to articulate the northern border, ultimately again It really doesn't mean anything, and really he's selling the entire thing. Now, I will say, now the Gemara says, here's what's interesting. The Gemara says, and you don't see this often, I will say. The Gemara says, okay, so now we have obviously two opposite versions of Rava. But interestingly enough, there is some commonality which comes from both of the versions. Shamina metarvayu, Shamina metarvayu lishnei de Rava. So I'll say, so first off, from both of these versions of Rava, we can emerge with certain universally held truths. What are the universally held truths? Number one, de besada lo shir velo midi. The Rebbe said that first of all, again, it appears that halacha l'maisa, that when selling the field, ultimately, again, I'm not withholding anything. In other words, that not like Ravasi, right? We're rejecting that concept that when you fail to go ahead and articulate the fourth side, that all you're doing is what? Selling a strip, selling a ches, right? So no. Everyone will agree that you're selling the field. In other words, the machlokes is just about the strip on the northern side. But everyone is agreeing that otherwise you are selling a complete field. That's number one. Number two, Vishamina nami dehecha demivla v'lek aleh richba dedikba v'lo havi tishas kabin kana. Furthermore, what else does everybody agree with? Everyone is going to agree that in the case where the northern strip is not absorbed, right? Delo mivla. Sorry. When it is absorbed, right? When the northern strip is absorbed, which means the northern strip exists between the east-west borders. Everyone agrees, and that strip does not have a row of palm trees, or that strip is not large enough for 9 kav of seed. V'lo havi tisha kavin kana. Everyone agrees that you're kona that. So I will say, this is very interesting. The Gemara just wants to suggest, even though we have two dramatically different versions of Rava. Version 1, where Rava says halacha follows Rav. Version 2, where he says halacha follows Shmuel. There are certain universally held truths. Truth number 1, we reject Ravasi. That when you forget that when A omits the northern border, he's not selling a ches, he's selling that field. The only machlokes is about the northern strip. Furthermore, everyone will also agree that when the northern strip is absorbed between the east-west borders, and the northern strip is so small that there is not a row of palm trees, or not large enough for 9 kav, everyone agrees that that is included in the sale, that B acquires that. What else does everybody agree with? Lo mivla. Furthermore, again, everybody will agree that in the case where the northern strip is not absorbed, right? So in other words, it extends past the east-west or above the east-west borders, and it is large enough that it has a row of palm trees, or it's large enough to plant, but it's either or shear, or it's large enough to plant test cabin, low kana, ultimately again that you don't acquire. So everyone agrees that if the strip is above the east-west border and it is large enough for a row of palm trees or 9 kav, that B does not acquire it, that A is withheld that from the sale. Lo kana mivla v'ika aleha lo mivla v'leka aleha. So we'll say. So what are the machlokes cases? The machlokes cases are ultimately going to be the case of where the strip is absorbed, but it does have the requisite shear. It's absorbed within the east-west border, but it's large enough for the palm trees or large enough for the seeds, right? Or it's not absorbed, but it doesn't have the requisite shear of the row of palm trees or the seeds. Itmar lahai gisa ve'itmar lahai gisa. Those are the machlokes cases. So it's interesting. The Gemara wants to suggest everyone will agree: strip of land not absorbed and large enough for the row of palm trees or for the 9 kav of seeds. Everyone agrees not included in sale. Is absorbed and not large enough for the palm trees or for the 9 kav of seeds. Everyone agrees is in the sale. The issue becomes large enough but absorbed, or small enough and not absorbed. Those are going to be the machlokes cases. And the Gemara says, so what do you do with those? Shuda dedaini. Those are going to be up to judicial discretion. That's going to be up to judicial discretion. So I will say, and we'll see. Essentially, the Rambam really paskins halacha l'maisa like Rav. That halacha l'maisa again. That really, when you fail to go and identify the northern side, so B will acquire everything except that strip. And this is really how we pass in halacha l'maisa. So again, if the strip is large enough that it's excluded, it's not muvla, it's excluded, and it's large enough for the palm trees or for the 9 kav of seeds, that is not included in the sale, right? Small enough enough and it is included, or is absorbed, it is included. The machlokes case is really going to be these last two cases over here. Large enough, right? Large and, small and excluded, or large and included. Those are the machlokes. And how do we resolve it? Shuda Dedaini, going to be a case of judicial discretion. Trying to figure out what we think A really had in mind when he sold the field. Rabosai, shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day.